The night air over Little Rock was thick with summer heat and the faint smell of rain. June 22, 1989. Streetlights buzzed, and a thunderstorm rolled somewhere far beyond the hills. At 10:47 p.m., a passing motorist saw what looked like a pile of clothes off Highway 70 just outside town. When he slowed down and turned his headlights toward it, his heart dropped. Lying at the edge of a gravel turnout was a young woman's body, her arms stiff, her hair tangled with dirt and leaves. By the time officers from the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office arrived, lightning had started to flash across the sky. The woman looked peaceful in one terrible way, as though she had simply fallen asleep. Her purse was missing. There were no signs of a struggle nearby. No tire tracks that matched a suspect's car. Just the sound of insects, thunder, and the faint crackle of police radios cutting through the darkness. She was identified 2 hours later as Laura Bennett, 26, a nursing assistant at St. Vincent Infirmary in Little Rock. A co-worker had reported her missing earlier that evening when she didn't show up for her night shift. Laura was known for her warmth and reliability. She never missed work, never left without telling someone where she was going. Her parents, Harold and Diane Bennett, arrived at the station just after midnight. Harold's face was grey, his hands shaking as an officer confirmed the unthinkable. In the following days, newspapers across Arkansas printed her picture: brown hair, green eyes, soft smile. Nurse's aide found dead, police seek leads. Residents of Little Rock were stunned. Violent crime wasn't unheard of, but something about Laura's death felt personal. The community lit candles at the hospital's chapel. Neighbors left flowers outside the Bennett family home. Detectives started their work the next morning. The coroner's report confirmed that Laura had died between 9:30 and 10 p.m., likely killed elsewhere, then dumped near the highway. She'd been strangled. There were signs she'd fought back, scratches on her wrists, faint bruising along her arms. Whoever did it had been close enough to look her in the eye. The investigation began with her routine. Laura had finished a morning shift at the hospital that Thursday, went home to her apartment, and reportedly planned to meet a friend for dinner. But she never arrived. Her car, a blue 1984 Toyota Corolla, was missing. Police canvassed the area around her complex, knocking on doors, asking questions, searching dumpsters and wooded lots. Witnesses remembered seeing Laura at a small diner off West Markham Street around 7 p.m. She'd ordered coffee, waiting for someone. A waitress recalled that she kept checking her watch, looking toward the door. Then around 7:45 she left, alone. Detective Ronald Hayes, then a 32-year-old investigator, would later say that this case haunted him from the start. "She was the kind of person you want to help," he said in a later interview. "She wasn't living a risky life. She just trusted people." A week after the murder, Laura's car was found abandoned in a dirt clearing 15 miles away. The interior was wiped clean. No fingerprints, no purse, no clues. A faint cigarette burn on the driver's seat was the only detail noted. Laura didn't smoke. Detectives interviewed co-workers, ex-boyfriends, neighbors. There were no threats, no jealous partners, no financial problems. The trail went cold quickly. One potential lead came from a mechanic named Robert Larkin, who told police he'd seen a man matching Laura's description at a gas station earlier that evening, arguing with a tall man in a dark cap. The man drove an old brown pickup. Detectives traced several trucks fitting that description, but none matched the details exactly. The witness wasn't sure of the license plate. Weeks turned to months. The Bennetts put up billboards offering a $10,000 reward for information. The hospital staff held a fundraiser, but no one came forward. Every tip led nowhere. By early 1990, the case was stagnant. Evidence from Laura's clothing was tested for fibers and prints, but forensic technology then was limited. DNA testing existed in its infancy, and Arkansas didn't yet have the resources or databases to run large-scale comparisons. Detective Hayes refused to let it go. He kept Laura's photo pinned to the corner of his bulletin board. He'd review the case file late at night, long after most had gone home. In interviews years later, he recalled, "You start to feel like you owe them something. Not just the family, but her. You owe her an answer." In 1991, a partial fingerprint was re-examined at the state crime lab. It belonged to no one in their database. Another attempt to compare it to local suspects failed. By 1993, Hayes transferred to another department, and the Bennett case file was shelved. The evidence, Laura's clothing swabs, the rope used to bind her wrists, was sealed in a cardboard box and placed into cold storage. Over the next decade, life moved on in Little Rock, but for the Bennetts, time stopped. Diane would still set a place for Laura at Christmas. Harold rarely spoke about it. Each year they'd attend the candlelight vigil for unsolved murders, holding a framed photo of their daughter, her smile frozen in 1989. In 1998, another detective, Sharon Mills, reopened the file briefly after a local inmate claimed to have overheard a cellmate bragging about killing a nurse in Little Rock years ago. The inmate, however, was an unreliable source. Multiple false tips. No evidence to back it up. Still, Mills ordered a fresh review of the evidence. But again, the technology wasn't advanced enough to yield DNA from the small degraded samples, and so the case drifted again into silence. 2 decades passed. New detectives came and went. Boxes were moved to new evidence rooms. By 2010, Laura's parents had both passed away. Harold from a stroke, Diane from cancer a year later. Friends said Diane died still believing the police would one day knock on her door with news. That knock finally came, but not until 2024, 35 years after Laura's death. It began in January, when Detective Carla Henderson, a forensic specialist in Pulaski County, decided to re-examine several cold cases from the late 1980s. The Bennett file landed on her desk. Henderson had grown up in Little Rock. She remembered the case from when she was a child. Seeing Laura's photo again, the young nurse smiling in her hospital uniform, stirred something. It felt like looking at someone I'd known, she later said. The evidence box was still intact, sealed with yellow tape. Inside were the rope, clothing and fingernail scrapings collected in 1989. Henderson contacted the state's modern DNA lab to resubmit the items using next-generation sequencing, a powerful technology that could extract profiles from even trace or degraded material, something impossible back then. Weeks passed. Henderson waited, half expecting another dead end. Then on February 28th, the call came from the lab. The DNA found under Laura's fingernails produced a full profile, and that profile matched someone in the National CODIS database. The name shocked Henderson. Thomas Ray Holden, 64 years old, currently living in Conway, Arkansas. Holden had no prior murder conviction. He'd served a brief sentence in the 1990s for burglary and had worked various handyman jobs. He'd lived near Laura's apartment complex in 1989, less than 2 blocks away. Detectives immediately began surveillance. Holden lived alone, quiet, kept mostly to himself. Neighbors described him as a bit odd but polite. When investigators cross-referenced his employment records, they found something chilling. He'd once done maintenance work at St. Vincent Infirmary, the same hospital where Laura worked. By March, the case was reopened officially. Henderson contacted Hayes, now retired and living in Fayetteville. When she told him they had a DNA match, he went silent for a long time. Then finally he whispered, "You found her killer." Police arrested Holden at his home on March 22, 2024. He was calm, almost detached, as officers led him out in handcuffs. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse days later, as prosecutors announced charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. But the arrest was only the beginning, because Holden's past was about to expose much more than anyone expected. When detectives began questioning Thomas Ray Holden. He sat across from them in a gray interrogation room, his hands clasped loosely on the table. Decades had passed since 1989, but his face still carried the kind of coldness that unsettles people. There was no visible fear, no remorse, just weariness. Detective Henderson placed the photo of Laura Bennett in front of him. "Do you recognize her?" she asked. Holden glanced down, barely blinking. "She worked at the hospital," he said after a moment. "I remember her face." Henderson leaned forward. "You lived 2 blocks from her apartment. Your DNA was found under her fingernails." Holden exhaled slowly, as though he had expected this day, but not the weight it carried. "It's been a long time," he murmured. "People make mistakes." That was all he said at first. No confession, no denial, just a line that made everyone in the room uneasy. Later that evening, detectives searched his house. In the attic, they found a box of old photos and newspaper clippings, many related to the late 1980s in Little Rock. Among them was a faded photo of the hospital parking lot where Laura once worked, clipped from a 1989 paper. On the back, someone had written "Shift ends 10." The handwriting matched Holden's old job forms. It was enough to convince prosecutors that he'd stalked her, waited for the right moment, and attacked her when she was alone. During the following weeks, the community of Little Rock found itself pulled back into the memory of that summer. For people who had lived through it, the news felt like reopening an old wound, one that had never truly healed. Former co-workers of Laura gathered outside the courthouse, holding candles and photos. "She was kind," one nurse said through tears. "She didn't deserve what happened. None of us ever forgot her." Detective Hayes attended the press conference, standing quietly off to the side. He'd retired over a decade earlier, but his eyes still carried the same intensity. "I promised myself I'd know his name before I died," he told a local reporter. "Now I do." In the official statement, the Pulaski County District Attorney confirmed the DNA evidence as conclusive. Holden's profile matched the biological material taken from beneath. Laura's nails with 1 in 3.5 trillion. Probability, an impossible coincidence, but what investigators couldn't fully answer. Yet was why. When questioned again, Holden began to reveal fragments of his past. He had worked maintenance at the hospital during 1988 and 1989, often in the same wing where Laura tended patients. Co-workers remembered him as quiet, sometimes moody. One recalled that Laura had once complained he made her uncomfortable, standing too close in the hallway or trying to talk when she was on duty. She'd reportedly told a friend, "There's something off about him." Police believe that after being fired from his job in early 1989 for repeated absences, Holden may have followed Laura home one evening. In his second interview, when Henderson asked him what happened that night, his eyes flickered. "I just wanted to talk," he said. She wouldn't listen. That was all it took. The implication was enough. By April, Holden was formally charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Prosecutors argued that he'd confronted Laura after following her from the diner, likely forced her into his truck and strangled her when she tried to escape. As court proceedings began, the Bennett family, what remained of it, returned to the public eye. Laura's younger brother, Daniel, now in his 50s, had spent most of his adult life carrying his parents' grief. When reporters asked him for a statement, he said softly, "My mum used to pray for this day. I wish she were here to see it." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Holden's defense attorney claimed that contamination might have occurred over the decades, arguing that DNA evidence can degrade and lead to false positives. But forensic experts from the Arkansas State Crime Lab dismantled that argument with precision, explaining how the evidence was sealed, preserved, and retested under strict modern standards. The jury listened quietly as Henderson took the stand. Her testimony was calm but emotional. She described opening the old evidence box, the scent of aged cardboard, the way Laura's belongings were packed with care, a young woman's life reduced to labels and case numbers. "When I saw her name," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "I knew we had to finish what others started." The prosecution played a recording from Holden's second interview, in which he admitted being in the area that night. "Maybe I saw her. Maybe she got in the truck. It's all a blur," he said on tape. The words sent a chill through the courtroom. Over the course of the week-long trial, the defense struggled to humanize Holden. He showed no emotion, no visible regret. A forensic psychologist later testified that he exhibited traits of obsessive-compulsive behavior and deep social withdrawal, someone who fixated easily on routine and rejection. When closing arguments began, the prosecutor turned toward the jury and spoke simply. "For 35 years, Laura Bennett's voice has been silent. The evidence you've seen, the DNA, the timeline, the connection, that's her voice now. It tells us who took her life." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On June 14, 2024, they returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Holden showed no reaction. He stared straight ahead as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A faint murmur passed through the courtroom, a collective exhale from people who had waited decades for this moment. Outside, rain began to fall, just as it had on the night Laura died. Reporters huddled under umbrellas while Daniel Bennett, holding his sister's framed photo, addressed the cameras. "It's over," he said quietly, "but it's not peace. Peace would have been her growing old, having kids, living her life. This is justice. It's not the same." In the weeks that followed, media outlets across the state revisited the story. Old news footage resurfaced, the black and white crime scene tape, interviews with the Bennetts from the early 1990s, Laura's co-workers speaking about her kindness. It felt like a time capsule opening. People remembered where they'd been when they first heard the news in 1989. Detective Henderson returned to her office one night after the verdict, long after everyone had gone home. She pulled Laura's photo from the case file and pinned it to her wall. Beneath it, she wrote one word on a small note: answered. But even as one case closed, questions remained. How many others had Holden hurt? Was Laura his only victim, or just the one they could finally prove? Henderson ordered a full review of old missing person cases from the late 1980s and early 1990s across central Arkansas, focusing on women who vanished near areas where Holden once worked. A few similarities surfaced: unsolved disappearances, similar ages, same patterns of abduction, but no definitive links yet. Still, the possibility haunted her. Little Rock changed over the decades. The diner where Laura was last seen closed years ago, now replaced by a coffee shop. The stretch of Highway 70 where her body was found is busier now, lined with warehouses and streetlights. People drive by without knowing what happened there long ago. But for those who remember, it's sacred ground. In early July 2024, a small memorial was held near the site. About 20 people came: retired detectives, hospital nurses, neighbors. Henderson attended quietly, standing beside Daniel. They lit candles and placed flowers under a young oak tree planted in Laura's memory. Someone read a short prayer, and the group stood in silence as the wind rustled through the leaves. Daniel said later that he felt something shift that night. Not closure, he didn't believe in that word, but something close to acceptance. "It's strange," he said. "You live your whole life with a shadow, and then one day you find out its name." When asked about Holden's arrest, Detective Hayes, now 67, said, "Sometimes justice takes the long road. It crawls, but it gets there." The story of Laura Bennett's murder would later be featured in several crime documentaries and investigative programs. It became a symbol of how persistence and science can bridge decades of silence. The Pulaski County Sheriff's Office used her case as a training example, a testament to why cold cases matter and why evidence must never be forgotten. At the crime lab, Henderson kept the original evidence box. It would remain stored indefinitely, sealed again after trial, marked in red, closed with conviction, 2024. Before locking it away, she paused to look at the photo clipped inside. Laura's smile, gentle and steady, looked back through time. Henderson whispered, "You can rest now." For Little Rock, the Bennett case was more than a solved murder. It was a reminder that every life lost leaves behind ripples, that truth can sleep for decades and still wake, and that even the quietest voices find a way to be heard when someone refuses to stop listening. And somewhere in the dim archives of justice, another file waits for the same ending, another voice waiting to be found, another name waiting to be spoken.